This is a video on how I'm warping a project for my Navajo-style loom. I say Navajo-style whenever I remember, which is hopefully always, because the art and history of the Navajo people can't be imitated, and so whenever I'm weaving, it is that I'm weaving in this style. Maybe more so than other weaving techniques, I don't know. But I have a Navajo-style loom that my brother built for me, and I'm warping a project that I hope will be a nice little rug. I'm doing this outside. I have hammered 4 stakes into the ground. I've measured the size of the piece that I want is roughly 32 by 32 inches. And I've measured that on the ground, hammered the stakes in where that would be the 4 corners, and I've tied 2 bars to stakes. And the reason I did it this way was my warp is a wool weaving warp from R.B. Burnham Company. This is their large cone, and I need room for the cone to go around the warp bars, so I could either roll it up into a ball and do it that way, but it's easier to work with the cone. So what I'm doing, as you can see, I have 4 stakes in the ground. These beams that I'm using, I've wrapped wire around. This one has copper wire on it, that one has an expensive aluminum wire on it. It's roughly at 8 dents per inch, 8 parts per inch, and what it does for me, it's a little bit of cheating, but it keeps the warp lined up for me while I'm doing this. And what you do with this is you take the cone. Right now where the warp is coming over the beam. You go underneath this beam, and then you go over the other side beam, around underneath, and over this one. As long as you remember that you always go over the beam with the warp, cone, or ball, whatever you're using, you will be preserving, it's called preserving the cross. You will have your 2 sheds already there, and then you can just, I'm going to twine this piece, which means that when I get the complete width warped, I'm going to stick a smaller dowel in here, and I'm going to twine the warp to that dowel. I'm going to do that on both ends, and then I will take those dowels, I'll slide these wired dowels out, and I will take those dowels and mount them onto the loom. And then I can adjust the tension by tightening how I have those hung on the loom. This is almost what I've seen of traditional Navajo warping, except, you know, like I said, I'm using these the wire on my beams, and I think they probably have better setups for warping other than just hammering sticks into the ground, but this seems to work. The rocks that you see, as you do this, the stakes may move or the beams may move, and you want to keep it even, so I'm using rocks to keep the sticks from moving, to keep anything from wiggling. Now I just want to show you what I meant by going over. So I've already gone over that beam. I could step through it, I guess, if I wanted to. Now I want to go over this beam. And you want to try and keep the warp at an even tension as you do this. And if you are using wire wrapped on dowels, you just want to make sure that you're in the next wire. You don't want to skip wires and have extra space. And that's how you do it. You go over each side. And that will preserve the cross of the shed, so that you can then insert tension sticks very easily before you twine it or as you twine it. I decided to make this project a little bit thinner than I had, narrower than I had originally planned. So I have the warp as wide as I want it, and I'm going to preserve the cross by inserting 2 dowels. I start at the end, go right up along the beam that I have there, put it toward the middle, like that, and do the same at the other side. And then I usually either tie the 2 sticks together or you can tape them together so that they don't fall out, they don't move, you know they're secured. And you can see there are your 2 sheds. And I'll just tie these together so I don't lose that. The next thing I'm going to do is to twine each end. And I have 2 dowels to insert the same way that I just inserted the tension sticks. And what I'm going to do is insert the dowels at either end, like this, and then I'm going to use, I'm going to have this extend down to the end. My loom is 36 inches wide, so any of these dowels are going to be suspended across the loom, fully across the loom. So I'm going to keep everything lined up at a 36-inch width instead of centering this on my piece. I could do it either way, but so I'm going to put that like that. I'm using a simple embroidery needle. I'm going to start with about a 20-inch or 25-inch piece of yarn. I like to use usually a strong cotton thread, but I have this handy. And what I'm going to do is pick up each warp thread with this needle. I'll tie this to the new beam. And I'm going to pick up each warp thread, go around it twice, which will secure it to the beam. Now, if you can, keep them very close together, the 2 dowels, so that you keep your spacing correct. And I'm going to go across and do the whole length until my warp is secured to this second beam. Now I really should be pushing this up so it's on top of a beam that has wire on it, but you have to do it carefully so that you don't have your warps pop out of that wire. You don't want to change the length of your warp by not doing it correctly. I'm going to undo the 2 I just did until I get it lined up correctly and can just quickly work across. And the problem is if you just pop this up on top, if you don't do it carefully, you could lose the spacing that you have on your warp. But doing it like that might be easier. And then just go down the dowel and pick up each warp thread and attach it. You'll be doing the same thing at the other end. So any shifting of the warp, this half-inch thickness of the dowel should be equal on both sides. If you do it lower down, you actually do it over here on the bottom, what is now the bottom beam, but you do it very close to the wire, and you'll end up twining almost the exact length that you have now. That's the point. You want to pick up this. You want to pick the warp up from here if you can. That's what you want to do. And you want to do both ends. If you want to twine both ends, you do both ends. And at that point, your warp is ready to be suspended on your loom. When you're twining to that second beam, you need to wrap around the beam as you twine. I'm actually going to do this in 2 steps. Normally I would pick up the warp thread, go around the new beam, and then continue on. As you can see, what I've done is stitched around each of the warp threads on the original beam that has the wire spacing on it. I'm going to do that all the way across, and then I'm going to go back and wrap around the new beam in between each warp thread, and that will attach your warp correctly to the new beam. Okay, what I've done is I've gone across the top of the warp on the original dowel that I had my warp attached to with the metal spacing, and all I've done is pick up each warp thread and more or less just link them together. Now what I did was tie the new beam independently with this green yarn to this stake that I have on both sides, so that what I can do is cut the string or yarn that's holding the original beam in place, and I can remove, this is a purple wood beam, I can cut this blue yarn, release this beam, and end up having the new beam with the warp, and then I just go back from left to right and take a stitch once I get the bottom beam off of there, go around the new beam in between each warp thread, and that will attach the spaced warp to the new beam. And you can see I've removed that bottom dowel now, and the stitches were basically at the top of the warp, so I can just keep my stitches straight that spaced the warp before, keep an eye on the spacing, and then just go ahead and take my needle and go up in between each warp thread, which will tie the warp to the beam. Now doing it this way, as you can see, is going to leave me with about a ½ inch of warp at the top that won't be woven. The alternate way of doing it is to, instead of going around the beam and attaching it to the beam, is to have another beam on the outside here and pick these stitches up and wrap those around a beam like right here. Sorry that I'm moving the camera, but have a beam here and pick these up and wrap them to where like my finger is. And then that's the way I've done my other rugs. This is probably going to be a tapestry. So, and I'm not sure of the actual length yet, So I may actually be having fringe. So I'm doing it this way. My other way of doing it was to not wrap around the beam, but to pick these stitches up and wrap them around an outer beam, which is then suspended from the loom. And there it is. I've got both ends twined to the new beam, and it's ready to be mounted to the Navajo-style loom. You'll notice it looks like the warp is a little saggy, but it's actually that my beam moved. So after I take this off of here, which is just by cutting the beams off, folding it in half and bringing it in and mounting it to the loom, I'm going to put the stakes in deeper and better support them with rocks, because this is the measurement front to back of my loom. So unless I'm going to make a very long piece that I would be rolling up at the top on the loom, these sticks, I can use them all the time. So I'm going to straighten them, bang them in better, support them better with rocks, so I get no fluctuations next time with warping. But that took about, well, under a couple hours, and I took a few breaks. So not too bad to warp a maybe 22-inch wide project for a Navajo loom, Navajo-style loom.